Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this Saturday is Gemini Wing, a 1987 arcade classic. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Tecmo, Gemini Wing released to Japanese arcades in 1987. It would also see console ports to such systems as the Spectrum, the Amiga, the Commodore 64, and the Sharp X68000 PC. Now, in September of 2020, it's available as an arcade archive title for the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4. And it also continues my combo of Wing videos, as this is the third video in a row where I'm reviewing a game with Wing in the title. So, Gemini Wing is this game with a really weird flavor. It does some things really interestingly that I think makes it a title worth playing, but it also has some really flawed elements to it. Diving into the game itself, it does support 2 players simultaneous, so that's the way that we'll be experiencing the game today. I also feel that in a lot of ways, that's the way that this game was meant to be played, as, to be honest, it's actually very, very difficult from a single player standpoint. So, this is a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up with a couple interesting features. We start off with the usual ability to, of course, move around the screen and shoot, but there's that extra flavor of those little balls that are trailing our ships. Those are called gun balls, and they're the main unique feature that Gemini Wing has available. So each of these gun balls has a different special weapon associated with it, and as we pick them up, we're basically increasing our stock of special weapons. We use a special weapon and it uses up the gun ball. It also happens to work in a first in, first out scenario. So the first gun ball you pick up will be the first gun ball you use. And there are 5 different types of gun ball weapons we can use. There's the main one that you'll always start out with after a continue, the 3-way shot. Then there's the spiral. There's a beam, which starts somewhere in the middle of the screen and kind of sweeps upward. That's actually based on the position of where your ship's at, so it's not going to be exactly the middle of the screen. There's also a homing missile you can get, as well as an awesome fire wiper, which happens to be my favorite of the 5 different weapons. And then there are also some power-ups you can get as well. And there's also a really neat feature when you're playing the game 2-player, where if you happen to move through your other player's trail of gun balls, you can actually pick up and share those gun balls, and sometimes accidentally take all of them. But it's a neat way to be able to share the firepower between the 2 players. So we've made it to our first boss here. Wow, this is a little unfair. And this boss, for the most part, is relatively straightforward and not too difficult to take down while playing with 2 players. Anyway, as I was saying, it's really neat to be able to share the gun balls between players, as you can kind of even out the firepower between the 2 players. And in addition to that, there are those power-ups that I was mentioning. In addition to the 5 gun balls, there are 3 power-ups. There's an S, which indicates speed. There's a number power-up, which will either be a 2, a 5, or a 10, which is a score multiplier. And then there's one that's kind of a heart with wings, and that heart with wings will give you an extra 1-up. It's also possible to earn 1-ups through hitting certain score marks. The arcade defaults are you obtain 1-up at 50,000 and another 1-up again at 100,000. There we go. Fire Wiper. So the Fire Wiper power-up, this one is definitely my favorite. One interesting thing about those power-ups I was talking about, though, is when you get those power-ups, they come up in your queue the same way that the other gun balls do. But when you use them, they are used with the offensive power ball that, or rather the gun ball that comes after them. So in this case, when I get to this 2, it will apply a score multiplier to my score when I use it, but it will also use the offensive gun ball that happens to be behind it. And if you have multiple power-ups chained, like a speed power-up and a life power-up and a multiplier and then an offensive one, it will use all of them to get to the offensive one in just one go. So with the second boss here, it's a good time to talk a little bit about some of the issues that this game has. So, as far as playfield is concerned, there's really this interesting limitation to our play area for a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up. So as you can see, if we're going to the bottom of the screen, this is as far down as I can go. It's not possible to go all the way to the bottom of the screen, and if you're going to the top of the screen, you can't go all the way to the top. It actually has a relatively limited playfield for this type of scrolling shoot 'em up. And the stage that we're entering limits that even further. There are several stages throughout the course of the game where you have walls bounding you on either the left or right side, making your playfield this really small box in the middle. A weird choice for a shoot 'em up. Couple that with the fact that we have a fairly large hitbox, which is standard for the time that this game came out, and it does make dodging and moving around the stages sometimes quite difficult. As I also mentioned earlier, I feel like this game really is meant to be a two-player title, as it's just not possible to control all the enemies that are sent your way with a single player. And if you watch through all the various demos that the game plays, every single one of them is a two-player demo, indicating that that really is the way the developers meant them to be played. Another potential issue we saw there, it's possible that power-ups can, from either your death or the death of one of the power-up carriers, can be lodged in the wall, making them very difficult to obtain through methods other than using the invincibility frames from starting a fresh life. Another interesting thing about the game is it has this really unique soundtrack that kind of gives it a feel other than this science fiction bug-filled shoot 'em up that it has. So it's more of this kind of gothic adventure style soundtrack. It's kind of like Castlevania or something in that kind of genre. And that is basically Gemini Wings served up for your enjoyment. So let's talk a little bit about the plus and the minus flavors the game has. So first off, the game is actually extremely hard, especially if you're playing it in one player. The default difficulty setting that the arcade emulation has for this arcade archive version is easy. They considered the game that difficult that was what they set the default setting to. Then in addition to the difficulty, most of the bosses are straightforward and not that bad to fight. However, the final boss is extremely unfair and confusing. If you happen to be lucky enough to get to that boss, it's very difficult without playing multiplayer to do so, as should you exhaust all your lives, you're going to have to continue from a checkpoint rather than where you last died before you continue. And then there is the element of the gunball power-ups sometimes ending up in really unfortunate areas to recover in the walls, or possibly spawning behind you. That just makes the title kind of frustrating and just feel unfair. Like that power up there, I'm gonna try as I might, I can't get it, and trying to do so, I actually ended up losing a life. But on the plus flavors, I do really like the gunball system. The fact that you can share the gun balls between players as well is really neat. I do like that. Though there are some, seems to be there are some restrictions. If there are only a few gun balls between the two of you, it doesn't seem like it's possible to share them. But if there are more than that, then it's entirely possible to pull all the gun balls away from one player to another. And then it really just does have that classic arcade feel from the late 80s. So if that's the kind of game that is your jam, then this is definitely one that you should probably add to your collection and give at least a few playthroughs through. Of course, being an arcade archive title, it does have the extra trappings that are associated with such. There's also the high score mode, or rather the score attack mode rather, and the caravan mode that are always present in the arcade archive release. So there we have it. Gemini Wing served for your enjoyment. That'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.